So welcome, everybody. It is so exciting to see all of you here today, and it is such a pleasure to be here with all of you. I was thinking this morning as I was watching everyone interact, it sort of feels to me like you're throwing, you've just moved into a new place for a while, you've lived there for a couple of years, but you haven't really thrown a party with your friends. And this feels kind of like that party. See a lot of friends here, see a lot of friends of friends, names that I've heard in the past. I'm excited to be meeting all of you. So it's really a pleasure just to be in this space. Ruth was kind of joking at the beginning as we were watching everyone mixing and just happy to see each other. We said, we don't even actually need to do anything. Let's just the next 2 days, we'll be okay. And actually, in a lot of ways, the spirit of what we're going to try and do over the next 2 days is exactly that. One of the other things that really excites me about the fact that all of you are here today is the fact that all of you are practitioners. And I don't know how many of you, if I asked you all to say how many practitioners are here in the room, I don't know how many of you would raise your hand. But in my opinion, I think everyone here is a practitioner. We're often leading when we think about our own identity about role, around function. I am a funder, I am a consultant, I work in a nonprofit organization. And while all of those things are true, the reality is we're all here because we're trying to do something in the world. We're trying to change it. And the reality is, regardless of the role that we play, we have a lot more in terms of ourselves, what we're bringing to the work, than that specific role. And that's really important because the thing that we're trying to do together is requiring all of us to be able to bring our whole selves to work. It requires us to understand at a very deep level what's happening, even if we're not doing those specific things in our day-to-day jobs. And so I'm excited to have people coming here who are practitioners, and I'm excited to have the opportunity to actually practice together. So I think the other kind of hallmark of the people who are in this room is that we're all learners. And I was thinking a little bit about what that means to me and kind of how that's sort of influencing what we're going to be doing over the next 2 days. And I thought about a moment for me that was really kind of landmark in my career. It's something that happened about 4 years ago where my mom had asked me if I wanted to go on a trip with her to Korea. And I said sure. I hadn't taken a vacation in a while. I love going to the motherland. But I don't speak the language. And actually that's always been kind of a big issue for me. I kind of suck at learning foreign languages. I always joke that I barely speak one language, so that second one is kind of challenging. And of course, that's always been sort of an issue for me because a lot of my identity and my culture is around being Korean, and so not being able to speak the language has always been a challenge. So I thought, you know what? I'm just going to take a class. I had never taken a course in Korean before, and I decided I was going to try and learn. Well, around the same time, so this was about 4 years ago. My older sister had her second son. Benjamin, my nephew, who turns 4 on Sunday, so I've been thinking about Benjamin a lot. And so the funny thing about it was he and I were learning languages at the same time. And I brought a picture of him. So you can all look. This is my nephew. And I was thinking about this as I was learning the language, and I was sort of having a hard time with it. And I was watching Benjamin learn. And the funny thing about it was he kind of sucked at speaking. He was a baby, and I felt like he really was not good at speaking at that point. So I was feeling pretty good about myself. But this is the funny thing. The perspective shift for me as I thought about learning a language, and as I watched Benjamin learn a language, Benjamin was joyful in everything that he was doing. No one ever said to Benjamin or to anyone else, wow, you suck at speaking. And in fact, every time he learned something new, every time he made advances, we celebrated that. That brought joy to all of us. And I thought about that, and I said, where does that shift take place? Where suddenly learning is not a joyful thing anymore. Suddenly we become self-conscious about where we're at and how well we do certain things. And I thought a lot about language. And I said, okay, so Benjamin's turning 4 this week, and his progress is amazing. He actually sounds like a normal human being right now, which is talk to. But it kind of took him 4 years. And 4 years, you know, it doesn't seem like it's that long because he's a baby. But then when we think about ourselves and when we think about the permission that we give ourselves to learn something very hard, how often do we say, you know what, we're going to suck at this for a couple of years, and then maybe by year 4, we're actually going to start, you know, sounding like a human being. I don't know where that shift, why that shift didn't happen, but for me it was really important because it was the first time that I really gave myself permission to say, you know what, I'm going to just try and model myself after Benjamin. I'm going to go out there, I'm going to talk, and I'm going to just see what happens. And a funny thing started happening, which was that no one was laughing at me. Actually, sometimes people laugh at me. I won't lie. But for the most part, it was sort of a joyful thing. And it was a joyful thing for my family as well. One of the things that I did when I was trying to learn was I sat down with my parents. I bought a children's book in Korean, and I had them read the book to me. And we sat down, and it was a long process because I couldn't speak the language. You know, I'm in my late 30s right now, and I'm sitting here. My parents are reading a children's book to me. And it was really a joyful experience. It really was. What I'm hoping that we all bring together today is that spirit of joy. If you all were kind of wondering what we're going to be doing, if you were thinking about like that spirit of play that I talked about, that going to the edge, be prepared, how many people were kind of nervous coming into today? Okay, that's pretty good. Pretty good. I was kind of nervous. What I'm really going to encourage all of you to do is to treat this as an opportunity to be joyful. And what I'm going to encourage all of you to do is to look at each other and watch us all stumble around as we're trying to do something, and find joy in that as well. That's the spirit of what we're going to be doing in the room today. So let's get a little bit more concrete about why we're here and what we're actually going to be doing. So I mentioned learning, and Rick mentioned practice. So one of the things about Benjamin is, so he's 4 years old now, and as I said before, he got pretty good in 4 years. He practices speaking every day. We don't think that necessarily, but that's what he's doing. When we think about the work that we're all here to do, making change in the world, doing it in a networked way, that would be, in my opinion, much more difficult than learning a language in terms of the capacity, in terms of the requirement to actually work together to be able to solve those problems. And as Rick pointed out, we don't get to practice that much. And I think that's really important. There was a time, there was a shift somehow in our society where learning became about consuming information. And if we think about what we often do when we say we want to learn together, we sit down in a room like this, usually not even like this, and usually there's someone in front of the room talking, and they're passing information along, and we call that learning. And there's value to that, but that's not the only way to learn. And in fact, when I look at my 4-year-old nephew, and I watch how he learns, there was never a time when he was sitting over there and someone was sitting over here. Right? There's something missing. And when we think about the urgency of this collaborative networks work, and about the change we're trying to make, when we think about the shift that needs to happen, I think that practice is really critical. Rick alluded to the field building aspect of it, and Jenny alluded to the field building aspect. When we sat down and we started talking about this collaborative networks project, all of us are relatively experienced. I started doing this work about 12 years ago now, which is about the time that REAMP started. And so I feel, quote unquote, relatively experienced. And when we looked out in the field and we thought about the consultants who were actually experienced enough to do this kind of work, really it was a very small number. It includes a lot of people in this room here today. And we said this is a problem, because when the Garfield Foundation announced its new Collaborative Networks Initiative, there were 62 people who applied, which is probably about 60 more than you guys were expecting. I'm not sure what the
Actually, 800 organizations, 62 proposals.
That's right. That's right. So there were a lot of people. And the interesting thing about those proposals, most of them were good. Most of them were from people who are actually doing really good work, who are doing hard things, and who want to take it to the next level. And we were saying, well, we can only pick one, And we need to make sure there are other people who can actually do this work so we can connect them. And we need to find other people that we can learn from. I often think about this learning example and where we're at, and I look out into the world, and honestly, I think most people are at the kindergarten level. And I don't mean that pejoratively, because when I think about us, I think we're in the second grade. And the problem with being in the second grade is second graders are probably more skillful than kindergartners at a lot of levels. But when we think about the challenges of the work we're all trying to do, we need to get to the college level. So we need to make sure that we're actually creating the opportunities to practice together, to do the work together. We need to have a lot more second graders just to be able to do the kind of work that we're articulating. And there's so much more that we have to learn. So this is the spirit in which we brought all of you here today. We want to talk about collaborative networks. We want to talk about what that actually means. We don't want to impose our views. We definitely have a point of view. But we also know that there's alignment in that point of view amongst all of us. And so we want to take a little bit of time to really try and get clear and develop some shared understanding of what those frameworks are. And then we want to practice. We want to practice together. We want to play. When we talk about things like system mapping, we don't want this to be an informational session. We want people to actually be immersed in system mapping so that you can experience it firsthand. When we talk about other sense-making tools beyond system mapping, we want to be able to see those things and experience them first, and then we can have a conversation. So that's the spirit in which we're all here together. We want to develop a shared understanding around what collaborative networks are. And we want to practice. We want to develop that practitioner community so that we can get a bunch more people into the first and second grade, and so hopefully the rest of us can get into the third grade maybe, and go from there. Are there any questions?
There's so many questions. I don't even know where to start.
All right. Well, I'll try and maybe answer a few of those questions up front by talking about our agenda for the next few days. So as I said, this morning we're going to be talking about frameworks.
Eugene.
Yes. Oh yes, Jeff.
When you talked about we're all practitioners, being contrary, I started to wonder, what would it mean to not be a practitioner? Like, what would I have to do to qualify as not a practitioner?
You'd have to try pretty hard at it.
Yeah.
Are you asking me?
Yes, that's a question.
I think that would be a great topic to discuss. I think to sort of speak to what I mean when I talk about this group being practitioners, I think intentionality is a big part of that. I think what I was referring to in terms of how we're kind of locked into this paradigm of learning around kind of siloing our identity around a role, around learning being sort of consuming knowledge, and some people have it and some people don't. I think that is an attitude that makes us ineffective as practitioners. And so I guess what I mean when we're all practitioners in the room, what I'm actually saying is we're all effective practitioners. But really what I want to say is that we're all learners. And what I'm trying to do, and what we're all trying to do today and tomorrow, is to see what we can learn together.
Okay.
Just quickly, I think the not being a practitioner is an easy construct, particularly for funders to go to, because often it's the outsider looking in. I want to fund the work. I want to make sure that it's getting done, but I'm not necessarily able to or willing to or sit at the table with. And maybe you don't have to, but if you still have that practitioner mindset, then you're contributing in a far more way, a deeper way than just funding the work and feeling like you've done your job. But I think it's a construct funders typically go to. I'm not a practitioner.
That's a really critical point, and thank you for raising that, Jenny, because I think that's oftentimes all of us fall into that trap. And what I want to really make sure we do in this room today is we take off our hats, and we all think for ourselves as practitioners. But,
Well, and I don't know how far you want to go down this path, because I think it is a good conversation to have later. But I would also say that I don't think that you don't have to try very hard to not be a practitioner. Because I think if you don't feel like you have agency and you have ownership over a process, and I think it can happen with funders, but I've also had a lot of folks I've worked with in networks say, well, I also have my day job, and I have to pay attention to that, and not having the consciousness of realizing that your day job now actually includes this work, and it's a shift, so that you are not, as Rick said, sort of losing that, being steeped in the network approach. It's all too easy for folks, and I think that's part of the challenge that you're naming, to not be practitioners.
Absolutely. That's what I would agree with that.
Just wanted to very quickly. I really like this framing. For me, what I'm listening from it is the practitioner framing is so that everybody, no matter what role you're playing, you're part of the system. One way or another, you are making shift in the system. Funders, yes, I'm design, but I am also in the system. The way I said, how I evaluate, how I select, will create a change in the system. So in that way, I'm part of the system. I need to be aware of my behavior.
Absolutely. And that's a point we're going to be hammering home a lot, I think, over the next 2 days. The fact that we are all part of this system and what that means. I think that's a critical piece of the system awareness aspect. Any other questions or comments? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing.